All right, integrating ERP and MES, a high-level overview, take 0. All right, so there's been a lot of discussions lately about ERP integration. I would say if there is one topic everyone wants to talk about, wants to understand better, and you are leading or participating in a digital transformation initiative with an organization, that one thing that everyone wants to understand better is how do you integrate ERP into your digital infrastructure. Now, there are many opinions out there. Okay, so what I'm going to talk about is how we've been doing it since 2013, give or take. How we architect these integrations, how we unify ERP master data with manufacturing execution information with raw events. Okay, the approach that we take to doing that. If you go, I have a call in an hour with the product owner of SAP Manufacturing, who is, and we're going to have a conversation about, is SAP digital infrastructure, for example. My opinion is it's not. Actually, it's pretty easy to prove that it's not. But SAP is a suite of functions. If you go to SAP, what SAP is going to say is the best way to integrate ERP with MES is to basically use SAP for as much as you possibly can. So, use SAP BTP with PCO and Leonardo and S/4HANA, use all those things together to basically, build the pipes. The problem is that a solution stack is not a digital infrastructure. Okay, and this is, Rockwell has run into this. Basically, everyone who's tried to do this, Rockwell, Schneider, Siemens, who's tried to be the digital infrastructure, they run into problems. And the problem is they don't have a solution for every manufacturing issue in an organization. So invariably, you end up putting smart things in your business that aren't owned by the solution provider, who has basically said, use our stack as your digital infrastructure. So there's that argument. There's the argument that, hey, buy digital infrastructure, which you can't do. Digital infrastructure is something you create when you connect together all the smart stuff in your business. Right. The other approach is you create a agnostic infrastructure based on technology. And in our case, we use the Unified Namespace architecture. We use open, edge-driven, report by exception, and lightweight protocols to pipe everything together. We use gateways to convert legacy data models and information models into a unified structure for the business. We use functional namespaces, informational namespaces, and definitional namespaces to kind of to structure a unified namespace and put all the data together in a way that it is contextualized, semantically hierarchical. That is, I know how to get to the data point that I'm looking for, and it's all normalized. That is, I can then plug that infrastructure, that digital infrastructure, into a machine learning ecosystem, and we can look for patterns in that data because every data point has a relationship to every other data point. Okay, that's called normalization. All right. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about how it is we actually do this. And in Advanced MES Bootcamp, which is taking place, so this is session 2 tomorrow, May 25th. If you're watching this on May 24th, what we're going to be doing in the lesson tomorrow is we're going to be integrating an existing manufacturing execution system with a Odoo ERP system. Now, why are we using Odoo? Well, we're using Odoo for a series of reasons. Number one, Odoo is the most open ERP system, and it has all of the ERP functions in it. So things like production orders, bill of materials, manufacturing steps, et cetera, et cetera. All right. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to quickly take you through what does this process look like from a very high level and talk about what is the relationship between ERP data and manufacturing execution data, which is probably the most common request. But the first thing I want to do is I want to read a comment from one of our architects. He and I were messaging this morning on Teams. He's going to be on this SAP call that we're doing here in an hour. And I want to read, what he said. This is one of the architects we, works on all the biggest implementations in the world. And he came, he did it for 10 years before he came to us. So and this is my experience. What he's summarized here is exactly my experience over the course of my career. So he said all of our active projects have some form of integration with an ERP. So we have some 230 clients. We generally are working with between 8 and 10 actively at any given time. All of our active projects have some form of integration with an ERP, not just SAP. In all cases, and even historically, in every project I've ever been a part of in his career, ERP integration was custom built and limited specifically for only the data for the ERP. So that is, the integration to the ERP system actually was limited and constrained. And the reason why, there's a whole series of reasons, but the answer is we only care about the ERP data that operations cares about when you're unifying in digital infrastructure to start. So inventory levels, order status, production, and consumption of finished goods. In any manufacturing facility, the needs of the operator, the line lead, the supervisor, the quality tech, etc., go way beyond this, but they leverage master data from the ERP. And so that is my experience as well. If you look at successful digital transformation initiatives, they start on the plant floor and they work their way up. The digital strategy comes from the boardroom, the enablement comes from the boardroom, but the implementation, the approach to digital starts on the plant floor and works their way up. And a really good example is if you look at Tesla, for example. Tesla built their own ERP system from the ground up. SAP likes to brag that they are in 99 of the 100 largest companies in the world. The one company in that 99 of the 100 that they're not in is Tesla. Okay. And there's a reason for that. There's also a reason why Tesla happens to be the most digitally mature organization in the world. I'm not picking on SAP here. The reason we've been talking about SAP more and more is because there's been a request from the community, specifically from our integrator partners, saying, hey, listen, representatives from SAP are telling manufacturers that Unified Namespace doesn't scale, which is literally preposterous. If you look at the 10 most digitally mature organizations in our data set, which are 1,381 companies, all 10 of them, well, nine of 10 have pure Unified Namespace. And 10 of 10 have some form of Unified Namespace. The reality is that if you take the traditional approach of integration to ERP, then what you will do is focus on transactions over events. And any events that you do handle, you'll have to define, you'll have to create sequential function charts, put in business logic to handle all those events, because inherently, ERP is transaction-based. It is not event-based. No ERP system is event-based. All ERP systems are looking first and foremost before they ever insert a record, say reference data or historical data, transactional records. They're looking to coalesce things into a transaction. They're looking to coalesce events into transactions because they have multiple columns. Think of it in database terms. An event is the value inside of one column. So it is literally it's the value in a cell, one row and one column. That in a nutshell, in general, that is an event. A transaction is really when you take a series of events and you coalesce them into one transaction that all have one timestamp when that record was inserted. But the values for each of the cells may have changed at very different times. And what you're seeing is the timestamp associated with that transaction is the point at which it was inserted into the ERP system. So this is why whenever you hear people talking about ERP, they talk about ERP in terms of the context of near real time. Okay. All right. So real quick, let's kind of go through what these integrations basically look like. So let's start with, what do we want to achieve? All right. I'm going to try and do this here. So, all right. So if what I want to do is I want to build something like this. Okay. This dashboard here contains data from ERP in the upper left-hand corner here. Contains data from the manufacturing execution system down here. This is MES data. There is a lot of information here that is from our ERP system. And how do we put those together in one visualization that informs the business? Okay. So question number one is, how do we do that? Well, the answer is we could do it a whole series of ways. Number one, we could treat that window right there, that informational window, as a consumer of a result set that comes back from, say, an API, an application programming interface, the way that you build most software. That actually isn't what we do here. What we do is we create an intermediary layer, which is a namespace that contains all the information that's on that window. And that namespace, think of it as a folder that contains all the parameters. That namespace is a coalescence of data from ERP and MES. So in order for us to do that, we have to have a namespace that contains all the ERP data, and we have to have a namespace that has all the MES stuff, and then we coalesce it into an informative namespace. The reason this is important is because in terms of raw data, we are not using APIs to move raw data from one consumer to another. What we are doing is we are consuming all raw data in the form of namespaces into one infrastructure. And then we move the whole infrastructure around the business. So if what I wanted to do was say, initially, all I want to do is have a pretty little dashboard that looks like this, I can start with, say, I start with a common infrastructure, digital infrastructure, building a unified namespace. And let's say it's 1/100th of what it will ultimately be. A unified namespace is living, it's breathing, it expands. It's always the current state. It's the structure and the events of the business at any given time. As functions are unplugged, we don't use this function anymore. That function is removed from the namespace. Okay. What we do is we say the first thing we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and collect all the raw data in individual events, individual namespaces, generally grouped by the devices. So where did that raw digital event come from? Oh, it came from this manufacturing execution system. Okay, we have a node called manufacturing execution system, and it contains just all the raw stuff. And then what we do is we point to that raw stuff as we coalesce in someplace else in the namespace, where we may create some functional namespace that's going to use a raw event from the MES system plus a raw event from someplace else. Instead of creating individual business logic, which is the way that most, SAP does this. SAP uses their infrastructure to create custom triggers and logic to move events from one place to another. Well, that's deterministic. I have to know where that event is going in order for me to build that thing. Well, no, what you do is you say, what is my function and that I want to build, say OEE that's using an event coming from a raw namespace, and you just reference the raw event, right? Instead of creating a pipe in between that has business logic that moves it, what you do is from your functional namespace, you reference the event you want to use, and then you do all of your logic within the function, okay? The reason why is because now the function itself becomes part of the digital infrastructure. If you were to go look at a standard ERP system, say you go to, look inside a BTP at SAP, and what you wanted to look at was the actual logic. I want to understand the sequence that this raw event goes through in order to get to whatever manufacturing flow output that I'm looking for. You can't see that. That's inside of the monolith, right? What we say is build open architectures that allow you to even see the event. So in the case of this window right here, because there's a functional namespace sitting underneath everything that's on that window is literally coming from a functional namespace. And we're going to take the entire unified namespace and we're going to transmit it into, say, a data lake, or we're going to put it, where it's going to be stored in a historian. Then we have the ability to view what it is someone was actually looking at. That is, what was on the screen at any given time. Not just the raw event. We can actually go, well, what were they looking at? What window was open? What were the values on the window at the time the event happened? So you get to create that now gets to become a variable that you can use in predicting failure or mitigation. Okay. All right. So number one, if you want to build this kind of thing and you want to do it in a way where this kind of thing is part of digital infrastructure and it's not just a consumer, then unified namespace is awfully important. All right, number two, so this obviously is what we're trying to build here, right? So this is the visual representation where we've got, basically namespaces in our nodes. We unify those namespace in a semantic hierarchy, ISA 95 part 2. So this would generally be site area line cell here, and then we would publish site area line cell starting with the site node up into enterprise. And so then you would have enterprise site area line cell, and then you would have enterprise site area line cell. And then inside of your line, you would have an ERP namespace, an MES namespace that comes from those raw namespaces. Okay. All right. And then, so this is, a sketch. If you're, again, we're going to go over this in the Advanced MES Bootcamp tomorrow when we're integrating ERP, Odoo with MES. But essentially, this is a high-level sketch of how namespaces are constructed if you're using ISA 95 Part 2. But this semantic hierarchy is the important piece, because if I'm from a different site, but what I want to do is I want to analyze data at this production line at site A with this similar production line at site B, I have to have a mechanism to, in an ad hoc way, be able to get to the data I'm looking for, okay, and not have the domain expertise to understand where the raw events are for that production line that's in a site that I have nothing to do with. And then the last thing is we want to do, just take a look at the slide that kind of started this whole thing, started the whole conversation about ERP, and that is our trends. So I published this. I want to talk about this piece here. So one of the things that I was trying to illustrate in the LinkedIn post that actually started this entire conversation, although we talk about ERP all the time, was if you look at the trends in the industry, so in terms of, Google Analytics, where is all the movement? Okay. The movement is in digital transformation, unified namespace, open architecture, basically the architectures we're teaching. And the declines are in monolithic platform and industrial automation. And what my argument is that as we're moving into the fifth industrial revolution, companies that are, say, from this is the Industry 4.0 distribution, the 1,381 companies, you'll notice that what's happening is the companies that are, just under the mean of the distribution and above are pulling away. That's where we see these gaps here. They're pulling away from the companies that are, their digital maturity is basically on the mean or just under the mean and down to the least digitally mature organizations. This is something like 700 companies in this group right here. Okay. And up here, these three bubbles here, that they account for only 10 companies. Okay. So, and all 10 of these companies here, 9 of the 10 are using Unified Namespace. Okay. And part of my argument was if you're working in this space here, in the automation space, then, your role is going to change pretty drastically, because what's happening is the companies who haven't already automated are in this group here, and they're falling off. Essentially, what's happening is companies who are very digitally mature, they are iterating with new solutions, and iterating means I'm solving a new problem in their digital infrastructure. So I'm building new dashboards, I'm building new business functions, whatever it is I'm doing, and they're doing that ad hoc, and they're doing it in a way where they're enabling CI/CD on the plant floor. So that is the best ideas in the organization are coming from operators, technicians, electricians, mechanics, quality personnel. It's the people who do the actual work. The best solutions are not being built by some engineering team that was hired, by Deloitte or one of the big engineering firms. You don't throw them in an office and they just basically solve all the business problems on some huge monolithic platform. No, that isn't what happens. What happens is they spend a lot of money, they build a lot of things that the business doesn't use. And the reason why, it's the same reason that manufacturers who offshored most of their manufacturing operations, their products fell further and further behind the market. And that was because the people who were solving the problems weren't the closest to the product. And it's the same thing here. The people who actually know what the problems are in the business aren't close enough to the digital infrastructure to solve the problem. Digital transformation is about enabling the end user, that is the person on the plant floor, to solve the business's problems. Digital transformation doesn't happen from the top down. That's a surefire way of, you might be able to capture value. You may be able to spend $20 million and yield, say, a $35 million return, so $15 million on a $20 million spend. But what you see is those companies who make that huge capital investment up front in these huge monolithic infrastructures, right? And those organizations see diminishing return over time at equal spend. So the amount that they're spending, the total cost of ownership, the amount that they're spending every month isn't one, it isn't exactly what I spent last month, but let's say it's 0.8, it's 0.7. Digitally mature organizations, each month, each year, they're reducing the spend on their solutions by, say they're doing 0.4, which is our goal. Our goal is with each subsequent phase in digital transformation, you're spending 4/10 as much in the next phase as you did this time. So if you're an organization who's doing a digital transformation initiative and every phase is costing you the same amount of money or maybe just a little less, or God forbid, it's costing you more, you have the wrong strategy, the wrong technology, and the wrong partners. Okay, that's just the simple fact of it. Okay. All right, so let's go. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to kind of show you how we coalesce together data and information. All right, so what I'm going to do is go here. So what I have is I have a MQTT broker that's running in the cloud. This is actually our community broker, right? So those of you who are transmitting your projects, like you have people from mentorship transmitting their projects up into our broker. This is our common open broker. But what I'm going to do is I am going to I'm going to just run a little script in our ERP system, and you will see what we've done is we've added in this namespace that is MES and ERP data all coalesced together. Okay, so enterprise site area line. And then what we have are 3 namespaces in our UNS. We have one called Edge, which is our raw events from the edge. So infeed, outfeed, waste, and state, they're all zeros. We're not streaming anything. And then we have our process data. So we have our spindle speed, feed rate, tool wear, coolant temperature, vibration, etc. Okay. We have our manufacturing execution namespace where we have our key namespaces of production, quality, maintenance, and KPIs. These are all coming from the MES system. In most cases, this is native. So the MES system, if it's, say, built in Ignition or it's built in Factory Studio, Ignition was the one I showed you earlier. All you're doing is setting up an MQTT transmitter. You're literally grabbing the MES namespace for whatever production line this is, and you're literally transmitting it to an infrastructure, okay? So we have a production namespace that contains a series of parameters, OEE, performance efficiency, et cetera, et cetera. We have quality, we have maintenance, and we have our KPIs, okay, including custom KPIs. This is a really important point here. One of the hallmarks of a successfully digitally mature organization is the ability for CI/CD from the edge. That is, and so imagine everything here from enterprise site area line, everything except for custom 1 and custom 2, these KPIs were red. And what that means is red is enterprise. So we have one common infrastructure. If I were to look at our semantic hierarchy, I would know which of the things are deployed from the enterprise and which of the things are custom features built on the edge. We call those blue. So say an engineer, he has access to the infrastructure. He's got access to connectivity of the equipment. And what he wants to do is create a new key performance indicator to test. So he doesn't want to go through the process of, going through the data enablement team to have them build a custom KPI that he may or may not use. What he has to have the ability to do is go to the infrastructure, grab the data points from, say, production, grab the data points from the edge, and if he wants to create a new custom KPI, he or she can. And that in that custom KPI is blue. That is, anybody who looks at our infrastructure will know by some indicator that custom 1 is not an enterprise KPI. It is a KPI that is within the KPI namespace for this production line, but it's ad hoc. If you want to know the number one, and the reason why that's important is that if I have a digital transformation team who's in charge of all the enterprise solutions and they own the infrastructure, so they create the rules, the minimum technical requirements for all the people working within the infrastructure, okay? So the person who built this KPI has been taught, instructed, knows the digital strategy, knows the infrastructure, and knows that if they're going to create a custom-made KPI, that they're going to, and they're creating it for that production line, they are going to follow these rules. They're going to go to the line, they're going to go to the KPI's namespace, and they're going to create a KPI. They're going to either call it something or give it a parameter, say the payload is a JSON, and one of the key value pairs inside that JSON is this is a custom KPI, not enterprise, whatever it is. However you define it in your MTR, you have to give people on the edge the ability to solve their own problems using your digital infrastructure. If you look at the most advanced, digitally mature organizations, they all enable that. And the reason why is because they're looking for a competitive advantage, and that is they want to be able to solve problems at scale. You can't scale solutions from the top down. That's just not possible, okay? Even in greenfield, you can do it initially, but as a greenfield site becomes more and more brownfield, it becomes less and less possible to go top down in solving your digital solutions. You have to enable people on the plant floor to solve their own. This is also the way that you conquer the problem of recruiting and retaining the employee of the future. Why is it you can't, legacy organizations can't recruit and retain Gen Z or millennials? It's because that's an entire generation of people who grew up solving their own problems. They've had access to all of human knowledge through a single pane of glass since they could walk. And then all of a sudden they go into a legacy manufacturing organization and the CTO is the CT. They don't have access to the Wi-Fi. They don't have the tools to solve their own problems. They say, yeah, I'm out of here. Look at which organizations don't have a problem recruiting and retaining Gen Z and millennial? The most digitally mature. If you look at the 10 companies that are in that 1,381, it's not even that. If you look at 2 standard deviations above the mean, there's a direct correlation between their recruitment and retention of Gen Z and millennials based on where they are in their digital maturity score. The more digitally mature you are, the higher your recruitment and retention rate is. And that's literally a linear relationship. Okay. All right, so tomorrow, this is going to look very familiar. Those of you who are in Advanced MES Bootcamp at IIoT.University tomorrow, we're actually going to do this using Odoo and our existing MES system, and I'm going to go through the mechanics of putting this all together. Now, there's a lot going on. There's this is just barely scratching the surface of, this is a very basic example of a unified namespace. I mean, it's very common for a UNS to, at an enterprise level, to have hundreds of millions of topics. Very common. It is incredibly common to have 400,000 to 500,000 topics at the site level. So, all right. Anyway, hopefully that clarifies a little better, the approaches of unifying ERP and MES. What I haven't showed you the actual integrations, like how to integrate, but what I've shown you is how to coalesce. What I've shown you is we're starting with what our goal is. We want to coalesce these things together, and then we're working our way back to the connections. In general, ERP doesn't meet our minimum technical requirements out of the box. So ideally, let's say we are, vanilla MQTT 5, right? So our infrastructure is based on MQTT 5. What we would do is we would say, there's only a handful of ERPs that support MQTT natively. Why? Because ERPs are built transaction-based. Unified namespaces are event-based. And here's a really good example. Every time the job status changes, that's an event, okay? But if I wanted to take a snapshot of what the job status, start time, end time, produced quantity, rejected quantity, operational availability, quality rate, performance efficiency, and OEE was at the time the job status, job status changes, that's a transaction. So if I fire this event and then I store all these things, that's a transaction. If I take it at exactly 12 o'clock, that's a transaction. If I take it at exactly the top of the hour or every 5 minutes, that's a transaction. That's not an event. An event is when something changed and when it changed. So when a data point changed and what time, okay? All right, that's my story. I'm sticking to it. Thanks for watching. Like, subscribe, comment down below. I'll see you in Advanced MES tomorrow. If not, I will see you in the next one.